And your wife.
Great. All right. Well, good morning. Thanks everybody for being here for what will hopefully be our last meeting of the study group. Did everybody have a chance to look over the draft report that Sophie sent out Friday afternoon?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
So, I see you're in the room. You don't need to turn on your screen, but I just wanted to acknowledge all the work that you've done on that report. You had a draft that we looked at last week, and you managed to, I think, do a pretty good job of incorporating all of the distinct thoughts that each of us had and trying to summarize it. So I want to just ask the committee then whether, let's start out by just trying to get a sense of whether there's anything right now that anybody sees, and I think we'll go through the report, section by section, before we wrap up. But right now, before we do that, is there anything that anybody sees that is problematic for you in terms of moving ahead and signing this report? And I'm sure there'll be little edits here and there, but other than minor things, is there anything that anybody's got a significant problem with? Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did reach out to Damien yesterday and asked him to add some language in the report regarding the survey that was done. And I think there's probably a way for him to share that. Yeah. Or Sophie, here you go.
Yeah, so Sophie and I added language for Senator Collmore in two places. One is the sentence at the end of the paragraph about migrant labor regarding the USDA Census of Agriculture. And then the other is a paragraph regarding the concerns that Senator Collmore and Brock raised regarding the Migrant Justice Survey. And so that's a new paragraph that goes after the summary of what the committee heard from Migrant Justice and the Dairy Producers Association, mainly raising issues about how the information, there's a lack of information about exactly where those farms are located, how big they are, which makes it hard to draw conclusions from that information, I think is the way to summarize that, but you can all read the language on your screens.
I'll just scroll up again and get the start of it.
Is this the second instance of change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay.
can go back up to the first one. The first one was a clarification about using the term migrant worker and what that means, and then using the term undocumented worker. And I did go through to make sure that was consistent through the rest of the document. And migrant worker is really only used in connection to this particular paragraph and the term migrant justice. Otherwise, we haven't used that term in the rest of the report.
And the point is that a migrant worker could be somebody who lives on the West Coast or somewhere else within the country, but is here working on farm.
Right. There are folks that travel around working on different crops, and they would be considered migrant workers as they work up and down the eastern seaboard or wherever they may be. And then the second one was this. Unfortunately it's split across 2 pages, but this was one addressing concerns about the sample size for the Migrant Justice Survey. And also referencing the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance survey, which actually was pretty flimsy. I mean, it was really just a summary from the one person that testified.
So,
okay. Sorry, does somebody have a hand up or want to say something?
I don't know in the how. Do I?
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm on my phone. So it and I would have to toggle between this, and I'm on my phone right now, but it looks like it says that their legal status is in question. And I'd just like to hear from Senator Brock and Senator Collmore kind of what that signifies as to why we would question the information being provided by them. And I just think what to me feels like it would be patently unfair is to only call into question farm workers who we are unsure of their legal status without calling into question farmers who may employ people who are undocumented. I don't see in either case how it's relevant necessarily to our ultimate recommendations. And I'd just like to hear an explanation.
I took it more as just a definitional piece. It really doesn't have anything to do with the second piece of this. This was something that was actually, I think, in the USDA language at one point. I don't know if Senator Brock has any comment on it.
Well, I guess it's just the overall situation of whether or not we have enough information. The information appears to be conflicting, and whether or not we're getting truthful information. We know that migrant workers lie in order to get a job. And what other lies are here, I can't tell from the information that we have. False Social Security numbers is the classic example of that. The numbers don't appear to be issued by farmers. They do appear to be a characteristic of the migrant, undocumented worker category of people who are working illegally under federal law. I don't recall, I read the report last week very quickly among a ton of other reports, whether or not there's much reference to also to the court case, the Supreme Court case that dealt with this issue that Damian provided me. Is that what there was a footnote that makes reference to that? Was there not, Damian?
I believe there is a footnote in the report that makes reference to that. I'm just searching it right now. And yep. Yeah, it's on page. So it's in the recommendations. We make reference to the Hoffman plastic compounds case. So it's page just 14. And there we say that while considering this issue, the committee discussed the applicability of the Hoffman Plastic Compounds Incorporated v. National Labor Relations Board decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in 2002. In that case, the court considered whether an undocumented worker was entitled to an award of back pay under the National Labor Relations Act after the worker was terminated by their employer in violation of the act. The decision held that the act cannot be read to conflict with federal immigration law, and therefore an undocumented worker could not receive back pay. The committee heard additional testimony from legislative counsel, which explained that while this holding prevented workers without legal authorization to work in the U.S. from receiving back pay awards under the NLRA, other courts have awarded back pay to undocumented workers for violations of other employment laws, such as the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. Accordingly, it was suggested that the General Assembly should consider expressly addressing whether only agricultural workers legally authorized to work in the United States would be entitled to the protections provided under any potential collective bargaining law. And I believe that was Senator Brock's suggestion. Yep. So that,
Damian,
go ahead.
Could I ask you or Sophie to, I guess, email the committee these changes? It's hard for me to see them. Well, I can't see them right now, for example, and I'd like a chance to see them on my own device.
I'm doing that right now.
Great, thank you.
And it might make sense for us to go page by page through the document, starting back at the beginning.
Yeah, that's, so Damien, I do want to do that. I wanted to start by just asking, as I did, whether anybody had any objections to right now as the report was drafted. So we've heard those two. And I think we can go through it then, bearing that in mind, but we can continue to discuss this, these two, if people would like. And I'd also like to see whether there's anybody else or whether there were any other strong objections to anything.
Mr. Chair,
Go
I don't think we can move on without, I'd at least like to object to Senator Brock's characterization that people are just patently lying. We did not hear testimony to that effect. We would have needed to bring in some kind of immigration expert to better understand what's being characterized. And frankly, I think what we did here was that many dairy farmers rely on immigrant labor from people who are undocumented. And I mean, I've served on the Attorney General's immigration task force with farmers, who said these are folks that they consider like family. They get them things that they need. And so we would also be accusing Vermont farmers of being complicit in falsifying someone's immigration status for the benefit of their farm. And I don't think either charge is anything that we heard deep testimony on. We did hear from the Dairy Alliance farmer's representative that he wanted to remain silent on whether or not his members had undocumented workers on his farm. So then to accuse the workers themselves of lying, I think is unfair. And I would object to referring to people's status of documentation as a way to discredit the information that they're sharing.
May I just respond to that, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you may. I do think that
we did take testimony in the
Senator Brock.
Yeah.
I just want to suggest that I think we can question the validity of a survey based on the sample size without necessarily impugning the motives or the general approach that a large group of people are taking to fulfill an important role in our dairy sector. So go ahead, Senator.
I realize that it might be politically correct to say that, but in point of fact, we did take testimony on where did the Social Security numbers required for employment status in the United States for undocumented workers come from? And that was a question I know that I specifically asked the head of Migrant Justice. And the answer was, I don't know. We've taken no testimony, that's correct. But what we do know is that undocumented workers place Social Security numbers on the forms necessary for them to work in the United States. I personally examined the records of a number of undocumented workers in farms in principally in Addison County, by the way, and several years ago. And what I did find is that the Social Security numbers were used, typically belonging to other people, or in some cases, people who were dead. Those were used as the basis for the employment determination because the farmers are required to submit that. What I found no evidence that the farmers were supplying those numbers, that they were being issued by or used by undocumented workers on a regular basis throughout Vermont. Now, again, though we didn't get it in this committee, I certainly heard it elsewhere, and I certainly raised the question in the Senate Economic Development Committee, and I believe that Senator Ram Hinsdale was there when I raised the question.
And I'd be happy for you to bring in testimony, but I'm not gonna. I don't think it has any place in this report when this wasn't. You didn't ask for any experts on this topic. I mean, we have spent a long time talking about the wages, the working conditions, the way the states can help our dairy industry. We did not spend time talking about our broken immigration system.
Other
This
comments?
particular paragraph simply indicates that we do not have sufficient information. And as a result, additional information is needed to help us make a sound recommendation. I believe that's the point of the paragraph.
If that's the point of the paragraph, I move that we take out the piece about documentation status. And I have no problem with the rest of the paragraph. I mean, I don't know that it's relevant. I think it's a better sample size and better information. I think it even had some academic involvement. So I do think it has more of validity than the informal nature of what we heard from the Farmers Association. But I'm okay with you both saying that you have raised concerns about the validity of the survey, but I don't think thorough concerns were raised by you in sufficient time with sufficient evidence about how their documentation status affects their credibility to speak about their working conditions.
All right, Senator Ram Hinsdale has moved that we strike. I'm going to have to ask you to, or somebody else to repeat again the sentence, Keisha.
I think it's the last "and" of a particular line. Sophie, you can help me out.
I just put a strike through on "and the legal status of the workers interviewed." So I think the sentence would read, Senators Collmore and Brock were concerned by the small sample size of the Migrant Justice Survey, as well as the lack of information provided to the committee regarding the survey methodology, the specific questions asked by surveyors, the number of farms included in the survey, the location of those farms, the size and makeup of the workforce on the included farms. I guess I would just put an "and" in here.
Yeah.
I guess in general, I would just say we did not hear any of that information from their counterpart from the Dairy Producers Alliance.
We didn't hear any of that. Did we hear any of that from Migrant Justice?
We've got you can see there in footnote 17, we did have some information that it was conducted on 212
Yeah,
Spanish-speaking
I saw
immigrant
that.
dairy workers. And there was other information in that survey.
And the
report on how they-
methodology, I believe, is
Yeah.
there.
on how they gathered the information.
I just think it's really unfair to. They actually have a stronger methodology and more information about how this was conducted and where than the Dairy Alliance.
So are you moving, Keisha, to just strike "and the legal status of the workers interviewed"?
I mean, as I know that the chair asked for this to be emailed to us, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to die on this hill because you both are saying it's your concern, but I think it's factually incorrect and sort of intellectually unfair. And I just want to state that, and I'd let it go just with removing undocumented status, but to not raise similar concerns about a much more informal survey of the Producers Alliance, it does feel unfair.
Well, I'll let Senator Brock answer for him with respect to that clause.
Well, that clause, the proposal at this point is to eliminate "and the legal status of the workers interviewed."
Yes.
And I guess the question is why?
I think we're running low on time. I feel like I just answered that thoroughly. And I could move to strike the entire paragraph, but it's you both saying how you feel. But the concerns were not legitimately raised about why their undocumented status would be a disqualifier for hearing their concerns, and the other information that you seek about the survey is more present than it is from the Dairy Producers Alliance.
Well, I simply go back to the fact that their presence in the United States as undocumented workers and what's necessary to be an employee under federal law requires an untruth? How do you demonstrate, how do you become employed without false information? It's almost a priori.
But you're laying that at the feet of the worker, not our legal or agricultural system, not the farmers who employ them, and then particularly questioning their credibility about their worker experience. And I just think that's unfair. And I actually think some of what you say here is just inaccurate about the level of detail of the survey and the methodology.
Well, I'm happy to say that there's insufficient information to rely on it.
Sure. But
would it resolve the issue to add lines or paragraphs, Keisha, stating your and potentially other people's concerns that lack of information or lack of enough information applies to all of the testimony we've heard and not merely one survey?
I'm happy to say that there's insufficient information to rely on the numbers being presented in particular, because there is a conflict and an inconsistency.
what is the conflict?
Well, I think in terms of the numbers that were presented by both sides of average wage rates and so on, there's just insufficient information about wage rates. Is that a fair statement?
We can say that without calling people's documentation status into question as a reason to dismiss their concerns. If we can scrap this entire paragraph and just say, information presented from both of these organizations had conflicting wage information, we all could sign on to that concern.
Keisha, are you suggesting that we essentially replace several paragraphs that provide the detail on the wage surveys and have a summary statement that says we received conflicting information and the reliability or the validity of the data was not clear? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because if I were trying to boil this down in committee from our longer discussion here, that's the sense I'm taking away. That's the point of this paragraph. If the point of this paragraph is to call into question the inconsistencies about wage information we heard, I think that's fine and fair. To go into such detail to dismiss or discredit one survey and not the other, or just to feel the need to discredit it at all, I just don't think it's necessary. And I would either ask why that's important, or if we could just say with both, there was conflicting wage information.
But we do say that at the last sentence of that paragraph,
Okay,
which begins for
but
these
why do you
reasons.
need the rest of it, Senator Collmore?
I'm sorry?
Why do you need the rest of the paragraph?
Well, again, I read the report that was presented by Migrant Justice, and I just had a lot of questions about it. They said that they used current and former farm workers to conduct the survey, and I wanted to know how many of each. There's no sort of methodology footnote at the end of that report. It just presents something and it says, that's our report kind of thing. In other words, was it just one person interviewing one person, or were there both a Spanish-speaking and an English-speaking person interviewing a farm worker? And if it's current people, does that mean that somebody is actually questioning someone that they actually work with at the time? I was not clear on that.
But what ultimately do you want to question about the survey? That the wage information is in conflict?
I wouldn't say it's in conflict. I would just say it's based on the sample size and the questions I just raised, it's incomplete. And you
Do you
know,
have the same concerns about the Dairy Producers Alliance survey?
well, it says for these reasons, the apparent conflict between the wage information provided by the two parties that we're talking about, we think additional information is needed. That's
But
all we're saying.
you go into, but I'm asking you to not go into the same level of detail to criticize or discredit the Migrant Justice Survey without either equal concern over the Dairy Producers Alliance survey, or to simply let all of that detail go, because I think it would be biased and unfair to only levy that at one of the organizations.
Well, I think discredit might be a little stronger word than I intended.
That's what it feels like from reading it.
Okay. Again, I'd like to know how many farms, where they are. None of that material was available. And the actual sitting down and doing an interview with somebody, is that where there's one person and one person? Was the survey done on the farm, for instance? I don't think that's necessarily discrediting. I think it's just raising questions about the survey. That's all.
Well, Senator Colmore, I did ask us to acknowledge, after we heard from both organizations, that our dairy industry relies on undocumented workers to produce the milk and the dairy products that make up the Vermont brand. And
Okay.
nobody could deny that, not even the Dairy Producers Alliance. They specifically asked to remain silent on the question of whether there was undocumented worker labor being used on their members' farms. So I'm simply asking why we are saying migrant justice needs to be more clear about who these folks are, where the farms are, who use undocumented workers, why the undocumented workers should or shouldn't be counted in our documentation of working conditions and wages. But we didn't have the same rigorous questioning of the Dairy Producers Alliance. And so why would we need to get that specific about either one, instead of just saying, we heard from both of them, here's a footnote to both of their documents, so people can make their own determination about what is valuable information or not, and then say they have conflicting wage information.
So
The fact that we need additional information, I believe, is an important piece, and that is the key element of this comment, that we have insufficient information to rely on, and it is conflicting information. I'm happy to leave it at that.
Okay.
But
So
I don't think it should be a footnote. I think it should be in the report.
But we can say, okay, we can say it and reference those two surveys without attacking one of the documents over the other, saying one lacks sufficient information, but the other doesn't lack sufficient information. I just think we can boil this paragraph down to, here are the references to these two surveys and reports, and they have conflicting and incomplete information.
Keisha, could you take the Word doc that we just got in our email, if you have that, and do a quick edit on it as you're suggesting?
Sure.
And let's
The
take a
other
look
thing
at what it looks like.
The other thing I would ask, Mr. Chair, the three of us have seemingly dominated the discussion here. I haven't heard anybody else sort of weigh in. I mean, if the others feel strongly in Keisha's direction, I guess that's okay. And
Well,
maybe there's others that feel the other way.
Thank you, Senator Colmore. So Representative Chestnut Tangerman had a comment. I think that was you a moment ago when we weren't able to see anybody.
Yes,
Rob, did you want to say anything else?
I share Keisha's concern that as written, it does not seem that the call for more info, it doesn't seem even-handed. Seems like the call for more information is entirely about migrant justice survey and does not, and there are no concerns about the Vermont Dairy Producers Survey. So if we can combine those, more information is needed about, given the disparity of of information, more information is needed about methodology and the surveys conducted, and leave it at that.
Yeah. So while you've been having this discussion, I've been revising the language based on your discussion. I'm happy to share that, or we can, Senator Rom Hinsdale can share hers. I just want to let you know I have a paragraph that has taken out some of the things that were objected to and captured the things that were agreed on. I think, but
Okay, well, let's see whether Representative Bartley, did you have anything you'd like to add to the discussion about these paragraphs?
I think that, again, it's both to the opinion of both Senator Brock and Senator Collimore. And we agreed in our conversation last meeting that, opinions could be shared. And I personally read it that more information was needed from both entities. So I could be swayed either way.
And Representative Supernon?
Hi, I'm sorry for not having my video on. We're having internet and power issues with the snow here, but I am in complete agreement with everything that Senator Rom Hinsdale has shared, and would, if a motion had remained on the table, second that motion to extract that language that was putting it into question.
Okay, so I would like to see if, Keisha, if you have been able to boil down recommendation or suggestion into language, and if you can just send that off to Damien and he can post it.
I was waiting to see where the discussion went. And then I figured we could move on and return to this. So I can, Damien, do you want to send me what you've drafted, and I'll use that as a basis?
Sure, I will send, let me send that right now.
Okay, so we'll put a pin in that for the moment, and I'll just ask again whether there's any stoppers, anything here that anyone sees as problematic before we go back and go through section by section. Okay, good.
Great. I just sent you that, Senator.
So, Keisha, if it's okay with you, if you don't mind double tasking, we'll go back to the beginning, and when we get to that point, when we get back to this point, we'll ask to see what you've got there.
Great. I'll send it back to Damien, and then I'm actually on the road to St. Albans.
Okay. So either Damien or Sophie, do you want to just go back and sort of help work through with us section by section?
Yep, I put it back up on the screen. And just a reminder, Senator Renner is here in the room with us. I know because she may not be showing up on your screens.
Sorry, if Senator Renner, if you wanted to weigh in, I apologize for overlooking you again.
I also would second Senator Rom Hinsdale's motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it's just, we're going to be a little less formal about jumping in, just because it's hard for me to see everybody on the screen. So feel free to jump in. We'll make it work.
Thanks.
Just let me know what you want me to do. Do you want me just to scroll through, or, and see if anyone has any questions? I will just say the two additions that Senator Collimore had requested that we already touched on, and then there were two other smaller ones that Senator Renner had pointed out later on that are really just sort of more small technical edits. There was a duplication and then an added word. But other than that, those were the comments that I received, and those are highlighted as we go through. But otherwise, this is the report you all would have seen on Friday.
I don't think that it makes sense for us to sit here and read it. And I don't think it makes sense for you to read it aloud to us. But if you want to just sort of call out anything that you think is, as we're walking through, what are the important things in the introduction?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the introduction really is just kind of setting the stage for what the committee was charged with doing. And then a little bit of the legislative history on how it came to be. The next section is really focused on just describing what Vermont's agricultural sector looked like. And we didn't have a lot of testimony on that, but we did have the information from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's census on agriculture. And then Representative Durfee, you had provided the University of Vermont's Extension Service summary of that data, which I thought was helpful. So I had included that just to get a sense for the scale of the agricultural sector here in Vermont. The next section was really looking at the agricultural workers. And again, this information's coming from the USDA census. I think of interest is that out of all the farms that we have in Vermont, less than 1/3 actually employ any agricultural workers. And then those that do, are broken down in the table that we have. Then we get into the information around migrant workers. And again, the clarification of what the census is tracking with that. And it's not tracking undocumented agricultural workers. And for the most part, the testimony seems to be that those are workers who've made Vermont their home and they reside here year round. So they wouldn't actually qualify as migrant labor under the agricultural census. Then we have the additional sentence requested by Senator Collimore. Then some of the summary of the testimony received from Migrant Justice, and then the testimony from the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance. Then the paragraph that's being worked on right now. And then a brief summary on the H-2A visa program, because I think that would be one of the questions that if this were to move forward with an agricultural collective bargaining statute, I think there would be a significant question for the General Assembly in terms of whether H-2A workers are included or not. So the information about that is included. And then these are more just, the next couple of sections are just standard sort of formatting ones, but just what the charge was, what the committee was asked to look at, and then specifically the proposal that the study committee was asked to provide. Then a brief summary of the committee's actions with a link to the witness list. And then it gets into some of the information that the committee received around collective bargaining rights applicable to agricultural workers around the country. As you all know, there's no collective bargaining rights for agricultural workers in Vermont under either federal or state law at the present time. But there are some states that have moved forward, and there's significant variety in the coverage and how they handle that. So that's referenced. We will include in the appendices, they're not included right now because they're PDF documents, but we will include some of those matrices that were provided to the committee that provides that overview on what happens in other states. And then, just pulling out some of the highlights from some of those other states. For example, the numbers of agricultural workers that need to be available to form a union. Then the states that provide for different methodologies for identifying who will be an exclusive representative. Then some states have agricultural labor boards. Those tend to be the much bigger, more agricultural states. Others have their public employee relations board oversee their agricultural laborers statute. Sorry, my sizing's going a little odd here. Dispute resolution, there was a lot of conversation around strikes. We know that's been a concern for a lot of people who are following this particular committee. So there's some information on that. We really didn't have that many other states with economies similar to Vermont. The committee was asked to look at that. We did spend some time looking at the Maine Act, because although that didn't pass or was vetoed by the governor, it probably has the closest similarity to Vermont's economy. And then referencing the testimony that we received from the director of the Massachusetts Department of Relations. Then there's, again, these were all the headings are all the particular topics that the study committee was asked to look at. So then the committee was asked to look at the Vermont's current labor relations laws and the capacity of the Vermont Labor Relations Board. I didn't go into much detail on the individual labor relations laws because they're not really relevant other than the State Labor Relations Act, which we did do the comparison between the State Labor Relations Act, the State Employees Labor Relations Act, and the Maine Act. But the Teachers Acts and the Municipal Workers, I didn't go into because it wasn't sure that was particularly useful as the General Assembly looks forward to using this report. Did include some information from Judith Dillon, the Executive Director for the VLRB, and around the capacity that the board currently has. And then this had come up, this wasn't a request from, this wasn't part of the legislative charge, but this certainly was an issue that was of interest to the committee, was talking about Vermont's proposed amendment to its constitution, providing the right for employees to collective bargaining with their employers. And so I included that in here as well. And then there was information around the employment laws applicable to agricultural workers here in Vermont. So the next section really goes into each of those pieces, starting with the minimum wage, maximum hours, which is also overtime, child labor laws, health and safety, discrimination protections, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and then some of Vermont's other workplace protections, which do cover agricultural workers. And then a reference to the other federal workplace protections that are out there. And then the deeper dive on the minimum wages for agricultural workers in other states. And similarly for overtime as well. And then the recommendations for the study committee. So the first thing was going through that framework that the Act 117 had requested the committee do. So the next sections really track all those pieces. This was a duplication, so thank you to both Senator Renner and also to Representative Chestnut Tangeman for noting that. There was a double replication there. But otherwise, the next section just goes through each of the particular areas that the committee was asked to consider. And in some cases, there were recommendations, such as having a separate Agricultural Workers Labor Relations Act. For most of the others, there really was no definitive recommendation, but did include some of the concerns that the committee had expressed. So again, I'm just scrolling through those. This was where an extra word was too, so we'll take that word out. We had already touched on this bit before, but this is the paragraph that talks about the Hoffman Plastic Compounds case and the Supreme Court, which was an issue that came up during the last committee meeting. And I tried to capture the recommendations to the extent there were particular statements made by particular members of the study committee. I sought to include the ones that seem most relevant to this. And then at the end was the proposed legislative action, focusing on the minimum wage and then on the overtime maximum hours.
All right, and that's the end then.
That's the end. I didn't have a dramatic finish, but if there's something people want me to add, I can add it in.
Yeah, so committee members, our names appear in that last section when we had something specific to say about if we didn't have consensus or unanimous agreement. So just want to be sure that everybody is good with all of that. Robin?
Thank you. I was just, as I read through this, I had an initial response, sort of dismay at how much we didn't accomplish. And some of that is difference of opinion, and some was lack of time. And so I was wondering if in section 7, small VII, mandatory subjects for bargaining.
What page is
I'm
that?
sorry, page 16.
16, okay.
16. Yeah.
Mandatory subjects for bargaining. Okay, it's I have it on page 15 on mine, but near the end anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sophie, thank you for
Sorry, I'm going a bit crazy now. Yes.
Yes, there. Thank you. And I was just wondering if it's a very indeterminate conclusion. I'm wondering, can we recommend that at a minimum, mandatory subjects include wages, hours, and working conditions, and that other subjects, other topics could be, or the committees of jurisdiction look into other topics, and that there be just sort of a definite recommendation in there.
In the spirit of trying to say something else a little more definitive, and that perhaps this is not really a very controversial topic.
Exactly.
This particular, the mandatory subjects. Other thoughts on that? Anybody heartily endorse that or strongly object?
I guess I'm ambivalent.
Ambivalent. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we say it there. We
But are you
recognize
strongly
that wages,
ambivalent?
hours, and working conditions are generally mandatory subjects. I don't know what else. We say it.
Well, we're not recommending that they be mandatory subjects if the legislature were to move in this direction. So I'm just looking for a more declarative statement. Yes, we recommend that these 3 things be mandatory.
I would second that.
All right. Robin, if you were intending that to be a motion, we will at least consider it that way. Let's have further discussion.
I would think that the subject for bargaining would be determined by the parties bargaining.
So the way it works in labor relations laws is there are mandatory subjects for bargaining.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it says that if either party makes an offer with respect to something in those subjects, the parties have to bargain over it. They don't have to reach agreement, but they do have to bargain over it. And then there are permissive subjects for bargaining, which are things that are not included in the law, and provided you aren't asking for something that is prohibited by another law, you may bargain over it, but the other party can say, no, we really don't want to discuss that. And they're not required to bargain in good faith over it. So that's a sort of collective bargaining nuance. Is traditionally there are some basic subjects, and it does vary by law, but generally they include wages, hours, and basic conditions of employment. They can include other things or expressly exclude other things. So, for example, for our teachers, we say you can bargain over conditions and benefits of employment, except that you can't bargain over healthcare at the local level. And so with those mandatory subjects, we're basically saying that if the union makes a proposal for a specific hourly wage, you have to bargain over it. But if it was something else, for example, housing benefits, let's say, and that's not specifically a condition of employment, it's an outside benefit, and it hasn't been included in the legislation, the farm could say, no, we don't want to bargain over that benefit. And I'm just trying to think on the fly here, but that's where where the parties can agree is usually in the permissive subjects. The mandatory subjects are things that we say you have to bargain. You don't have to end up agreeing, but you at least have to sit down in good faith and try to reach a resolution. So I hope that provides a little more context for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Damien.
Other thoughts? So just procedurally, I think we can poll or get a straw poll or take a vote on this. I also just want to be mindful of the fact that right now, pending the outcome of the changes that we were talking about earlier at the beginning of the document with the surveys, we're looking at a report that everyone can sign on to, I believe, at the moment. And while we certainly don't need to end up there, we're just want to be sure that everybody would be okay with not ending up there if we're introducing changes now that not everyone is comfortable with.
Yeah, and can I just say that my proposal here is not to change the intent of the report. It's merely to I thought that was an area where we could reach agreement on those three topics, and where we could reach agreement, we should. But I'm not intending it to be divisive or conflictual.
Thank you. And certainly, as we've done throughout the recommendation section here, if it was desire of the committee, we can break down whatever a vote might be and give everyone the opportunity to object and note that in the report for whatever reasons that we all might individually have. So I guess we're still at the point where we've got this language of a motion to make this as a recommendation. So, Damien, you were leading us through the process the other day of recommendation. So, do you want to sort of take the lead here and go back to this one again and ask us?
Sure. So if we take a look at that language, I think the first sentence doesn't need to change. I think what I'm hearing Representative Chestnut-Tangerman say is that in the second sentence there, instead of saying the committee did not have any specific recommendations, the committee recommends that the mandatory subjects for bargaining include, at a minimum, wages, hours, and working conditions, and further recommends that the committees of jurisdiction should consider whether to add to the list of mandatory subjects for bargaining, or whether to add additional mandatory subjects for bargaining, something like that. So sorry, you guys are watching my brain work through drafting a sentence here in real time.
That captures my intent. Thank you, Damien.
The committee, so I put the committee recommends the mandatory subjects for bargaining for agricultural workers include wages, hours, and working conditions. The committee further recommends that the committees of jurisdiction consider whether there should be Additional.
I would say mandatory subjects.
Yeah, at the end.
So what you started with,
bargaining.
Robin, is not what's coming out now. In other words, you've got two different topics here. One of them is that the three become the mandatory subjects, but then you've also said that the committees of jurisdiction, and by the way, I don't know who the committees of jurisdiction are. In the Senate, it would be up to, I guess, the Secretary of the Senate and the Lieutenant Governor to decide where this bill might get sent. But anyway, that aside, I don't know. I think the committee, the committees of jurisdiction will do that anyway. I don't think that we need to recommend it.
So, Senator Collmore, you made 2 points, I think. One is that it may be unnecessary to include the committees of jurisdiction in the language here, and I think you're probably right. But also that Representative Jessup Tangerman's suggestion was perhaps simply that we recommend that those three things be the mandatory subjects for bargaining. And I don't know, maybe did you intend it to be more than that, Robin?
You're muted, Robin.
Yeah, sorry. No, Senator Collmore's correct in that my original proposal was that we agree on those three mandatory subjects, others being discretionary. And I guess I mean, I don't object to that language. I'm not suggesting that that committees of jurisdiction find and include other topics. Just, I don't want to say that those three are exhaustive.
Okay.
Now I'm confused though, Robin.
So my point was to say that those wages, hours, and working conditions be mandatory subjects, that our committee recommends that. If there are other subjects to be mandatory, that's at the discretion of the committees of jurisdiction.
So one thing you could do is just say after should include add comma and then say add a minimum. So basically, or yeah, just like Sophie's doing here, add it at the end.
That's fine with me.
Okay, I'll go along with that.
Okay. All right, Senator Rennie, you've already seconded this idea. Senator Brock.
Yes.
Take a straw poll here.
Yes, I'm fine with it.
Senator Ram Hinsdale.
Yes, I'm fine with it.
Okay. Representative Supernant.
Yes, I am also fine with it.
And Representative Bartley.
Yep, I'm fine with it.
Okay, so I think, and I'm good with it, so let's make that change. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you all.
All right. If there isn't anything else, then maybe we can go back to return to the earlier discussion and perhaps see whatever language you've come up with, Keisha and Damien, putting your heads together.
Sure. Do you want me to share my screen? I can put the language up. All right. And I sent this around as an email to the committee members as well. So the language is that proposed change to the language is the committee was concerned by the apparent conflict between the wage information provided by Migrant Justice and the Vermont Dairy Producers Association and believes that additional information is needed with respect to working conditions on Vermont's dairy farms. In particular, the committee believes that additional information needs to be provided regarding the survey methodology and sample size relied on by each group, as well as the locations of the farms covered by the reports and the size and makeup of the workforces on the included farms. So this kind of covers a couple of different issues that were raised by Senator Collimore and Senator Brock about we don't know where these farms are in the state. We don't know how the surveys were conducted or how large the sample sizes are. We do have some of that information, but not all of it. And then we also don't know, are they surveying just large dairy farms or small dairy farms, et cetera. So this, I think, captures everything. It takes out the language regarding immigration status, and it doesn't single out one report or the other. It, in particular, kind of says both reports were lacking in some of the details. So I'll leave it up to the committee to discuss unless you want me to leave it up for another minute.
We'll leave it for a moment. Just want to be clear that
I'm sorry.
Either way is fine, Damien.
No, there we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify then, Keisha, your recommendation or your proposal is then doesn't delete any of the sort of existing language?
Oh, this was a replacement, I believe.
Okay, so it's replacing the language that Senators Collimore and Brock had asked to have inserted.
At least in that one paragraph that we had highlighted for a while, but
in the second instance, yeah, okay. And leaves intact the paragraph that begins witnesses for Migrant Justice, and then the next paragraph that begins the committee also received. I'm on page 3.
Put it in if you want me to share them so they can see what it is.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Switch back to Sophie here.
It would go in after the 2 paragraphs, the one about the survey from Migrant Justice, the survey from the Dairy Producers Alliance, then the particular language you just saw, and then it would be deleting the paragraph we discussed earlier.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Any thoughts on that language? Keisha, it's your language, so let's hear from anybody else.
I could support it.
Okay, thank you. Senator Brock, I guess I'll turn to you.
I'm looking at the paragraph at the top of the page. The committee was concerned by the apparent conflict between the wage information, et cetera. Is that left in?
That's, I think, the new language.
Yeah.
That's
the new language that's at that point, and then it drops. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
I'll go along with that.
Okay. Does the only thought I have, and I'll others feel free to jump in too, is the word concerned the right word? The committee was concerned by the apparent conflict. Does that capture what people are feeling?
Yep.
It's a nice way of putting it.
All right. Other committee members, any objections, any reactions? All right.
So this is Robin, and I had the perhaps the same reaction that you did about the word concerned, but I don't have a better recommendation, so I can go with this language.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. I thought maybe something a little more neutral would be the committee noted. But I think that may be understating what the committee feels, given the spirited discussion we had earlier this morning. So, and I think maybe we said so, but we're okay with the first change that was highlighted in a couple of paragraphs up. Yes, yeah, those definitions. All right.
I want you to see a piece of art that you may or may not have seen. Okay.
Somebody's microphone is picking up the background.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I got it.
And remember, if you saw this or you didn't see this.
It's not her.
There we go.
It's Senator Brock.
Yep.
All right. Good.
We all switched.
Does anyone have anything else you want to say? Speak now. All right, it sounds like then we have reached a consensus on the language of this with the changes that we have just been discussing. Where do we go from here then, Damien?
So if everyone is okay with the language, the next step is for the committee to vote to approve the final report with the changes made. After that, what Sophie and I can do is we'll send around a signature sheet. Senator Renner can sign in person today if she would like. And everyone else can sign the signature page. Either you could sign it remotely and then scan the signed page back to us, and we'll include multiple signature sheets. Or for those of you who are returning, you can, or if you're going to be in Montpelier between now and the start of the session, you can sign the sheet then. Ideally, we'd submit the report in the next 5 days, so it's on time. That said, I've definitely had reports that submitted a little late because we were waiting for someone to get to Montpelier. If you have trouble scanning, but if you can sign and then scan it back, that's ideal. And then
For those of us that may find that challenging, I'm not saying me, is it possible for someone in that room to sign on my behalf?
Yes, I'm trying to think how we would do this.
I guess my question would be, Senator Collmore, can you print it out, sign it, and then take a photograph of the signature page?
Yeah, I guess I could. Yeah. Okay.
Or you could also just put it in the mail. And we can give you a mailing address. So there are multiple options. You don't have to necessarily scan it back.
All right. I'll use my phone.
Okay. Yeah, and we can turn a picture from your phone into a printout that we can get into the report. So I think your next step is just to ask if there are any further changes, and then if there are none, you can entertain a motion to approve the report.
Okay. Are there any further changes? And if not, would anyone like to move that the committee approve the report?
So moved.
Senator Collmore moves that we approve the report. Is there a second?
Second.
Representative Chestnut Tancherman, second. Thank you. Any further discussion? All right. Do we need to do a roll call on this, or can I just ask all in favor?
I would do a roll call.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Representative Bartley.
Yes.
Representative Chestnut Tangerman.
Yes.
Representative Heather Supernant,
Yes.
Senator Renner,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Collmore,
Yes.
Senator Hinsdale.
Yes.
Right, and Representative Durfee votes yes.
8-0.
Great job, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your hard work on this and for coming to a consensus. I think that's helpful. Robin, I will say that I understand your reaction. You mentioned earlier that, geez, it looks like we didn't have a lot to recommend, but I think there actually is a lot here that will be useful to anybody who looks at this, whether it's legislators in the coming session or down the road. So thank you all for the time you put in what I know was a busy season of campaigning, of other things going on in life. So anybody have any other final thoughts before we sign off?
I just wanted to say, Mr. Chair, that my earlier comment was not saying we were sitting on our hands, but that it's a complex topic, and there's a lot of areas where we didn't have time or testimony to proceed. And in an ideal world, I wish we had, but we had working within the constraints that we had, that we were given. And I appreciate everybody's participation and commitment, contributions.
Thank you.
Well, to that point, it sounds like Senator Brock and I have agreed to take on fixing our broken immigration system. But short of that, we are operating with incomplete information. But I really appreciate everyone who came forward to talk to us about this, because the dairy industry is so integral and iconic in Vermont's economic landscape. And I appreciate how much time we did spend in taking a deeper dive into what's going on all of our farms. So I think it was time well spent.
All right. Well, Damien, then we will look in our inboxes for the report with the sheet that we need to sign, and we'll all do our very best to get that back to you in short order so that it's possible to submit it by the end of the week or as soon as possible. And
Posted the other two, and I'll post this one.
So just to clarify, you're just going to get the signature page right now.
okay,
We'll post the report that you just voted on without a signature page to the committee website. Once we have all the signature pages back, Sophie and I will stitch everything together in a PDF editor and create one final document, which will get posted to the legislative website. And when we do that, we'll send a copy to all of the committee members. So for simplicity now, though, we're just going to send you the one page, so you don't have to find it or print out a 50 or 60 page document to get a signature page. So
great.
Yep.
Just one final point. I meant to mention this on last Tuesday when we were together. There's posted on it's actually on the December 3rd, so last Tuesday's meeting page, a document that I received from the UVM Legislative Research Service. It's a group of undergraduate students who are available to research topics of interest to legislators. And I had asked them at some point during the fall to take a look at other states that have collective bargaining laws and to try and get a sense of how often, sort of comparable to what we heard in Massachusetts, where there had been no farm worker unions formed at all until very recently, despite that law being in place, to see whether they could get similar data from other states, which is not anything that we had a chance to get into at all study group. And they were able to pull together some information from about half of the 14 states. And it's interesting reading. So take a look at it if you have an opportunity. And just a quick spoiler, there is very little activity, at least in the states that they were able to collect information on. There has been very little actual union organizing. So they did not, it wasn't an exhaustive all 14 states. So that's important to know. But for the states, they did get feedback on not a whole lot. So anyway, thanks again, everybody. And I'll look forward to seeing you whenever we might meet again.
Mr. Chair.